Ambassador Park Ji-won walked slowly across the cold marble floor of the Galactic Council chamber. The massive room stretched high above her head, with walls made of some kind of crystal that caught the light from a dozen different suns. She had been coming to this place for 30 years, representing Earth and all of humanity in the most important political body in the galaxy. Today felt different. The air was thick with tension, and the hundreds of alien delegates sitting in their floating seats were all staring at her with expressions she couldn't quite read. Some looked angry, others seemed afraid, and a few just looked sad. Ji-won had a sinking feeling in her stomach that she knew what was coming. The chief counselor, a massive creature with 4 arms and skin like tree bark, began to speak. His voice boomed through the chamber without any need for speakers or microphones. After careful consideration of recent events and extensive debate among our member species, the Galactic Council has reached a decision regarding humanity's continued membership. Ji-won's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She had seen this coming for months. The other species had been whispering in corners, holding secret meetings and avoiding eye contact with her during formal sessions. Something had changed in how they viewed humanity, and not for the better. The charges against humanity are serious, the chief counselor continued. Territorial aggression in the Kepler sector, ideological contamination of primitive species, failure to respect established galactic protocols for cultural development. These actions threaten the stability and peace that our council has maintained for over 1,000 years. Every word felt like a punch to Ji-won's gut. Territorial aggression? Humans had only settled on uninhabited planets, following every rule. In the Council's massive book of regulations, ideological contamination, that was just a fancy way of saying humans talked to other species about freedom and democracy, and the bit about cultural development was laughable. The Council's idea of cultural development meant keeping weaker species under the control of stronger ones. Therefore, the Chief Counselor's voice grew even louder. Humanity is hereby expelled from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. All human colonies beyond your home system must be evacuated within 6 standard months. All trade agreements are terminated. All diplomatic relations are severed. The chamber erupted. In a mix of cheering and concerned murmurs, Ji-won stood perfectly still, trying to process what had just happened. 30 years of building relationships, of proving that humans could be trusted partners in galactic civilization, all thrown away in a single moment. But she wasn't stupid. She had been watching the other delegates carefully over the past few months, and she knew the real reason behind this decision. It wasn't about aggression or contamination. It was about fear. Fear of how quickly humans learned new technologies. Fear of how human ideas about individual rights and democratic government were spreading to species that had been ruled by kings and councils for thousands of years. Fear of change. As the security drones, small floating robots with glowing red sensors, moved toward her, Ji-won held her head high. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her breakdown. But then she noticed something unexpected. One of the Veltari delegates, a species that looked almost human, except for their silver skin and large black eyes, was moving closer to her. The Veltari was named Thys, and Ji-won had worked with him on several minor trade disputes over the years. He had always been polite but distant, like most of the other delegates. Now, though, there was something different in his expression. As he passed by her, pretending to adjust his ceremonial robes, he quickly pressed something small and hard into her palm. Ji-won didn't look down at the object, but she could feel that it was some kind of data storage device. Her heart started beating faster. Thys caught her eye for just a moment and gave her the tiniest nod before moving away. Whatever was on that device, it was important enough for him to risk his own position on the council. The security drones surrounded her now, their mechanical voices ordering her to leave the chamber immediately. As she walked toward the exit, Ji-won could feel the weight of hundreds of alien gazes on her back. Some were triumphant, others looked guilty, and a few seemed genuinely sorry to see her go. Outside the chamber, through the massive windows that looked out into space, Ji-won could see something that made her blood run cold. Massive ships were moving in the distance, Council fleet vessels, hundreds of them, all heading in the same direction, toward human space, toward Earth. This wasn't just an expulsion from the Council. This was the beginning of something much worse. The other species weren't content to just kick humanity out of their club. They were planning to make sure humans could never threaten their comfortable system of control again. Ji-won gripped the data chip tighter in her hand. Whatever Thais had given her might be the key to survival for her entire species. Admiral Kim Tae-ho was drinking his morning coffee in his office aboard the military station orbiting Mars when the priority alert screamed through his personal communicator. The red emergency light filled his small room, and he nearly dropped his mug as he rushed to his desk. The message was from Ambassador Park Ji-won, transmitted on the most secure channel they had. Her face appeared on his screen, and Tae-ho could see the fear in her eyes even through the grainy transmission. "Admiral, they've expelled us from the Council. But that's not the worst part. I can see their fleets moving toward Earth right now. This isn't just politics anymore. They're coming for us." Before Tae-ho could even respond, his communication officer burst into his office. "Sir, we've got massive energy signatures appearing at the edge of the solar system. Unknown vessels, hundreds of them, all coming out of hyperspace at the same time." Tae-ho's stomach dropped. He had been preparing for this possibility for years, but he had always hoped it would never come. He grabbed his jacket and ran toward the command center, his boots echoing in the metal corridors of the station. As he reached the main deck, he could see his crew scrambling to their stations, their faces showing the same mix of fear and determination he felt in his own chest. The main screen showed what they were facing. Massive alien warships, each one the size of a small city, hanging in space like deadly metal clouds. There were so many of them that they blocked out the stars behind them. These weren't exploration vessels or diplomatic ships. These were built for one purpose: war. "Get me a line to Earth Command," Tae-ho ordered, "and activate Protocol 7 across all human colonies." Protocol 7 was something they had hoped to never use. It was the emergency plan they had developed in secret over the past 5 years, as relations with the Galactic Council had grown more and more tense. Every human colony, every space station, every mining operation had been quietly preparing for this day. Within minutes, Tae-ho's screen filled with reports from across human space. On Mars, the civilian population was moving into underground shelters that had been built under the cover of mining operations. The Jupiter mining stations were powering up defensive systems that had been disguised as industrial equipment. Even the small research outpost near Pluto was revealing weapons that had been hidden inside what looked like scientific instruments. But the real surprise was what happened next. As the alien fleets moved closer to Earth, energy signatures began appearing all over human space. Ships that had been hiding in asteroid fields, space stations that had been disguised as debris, entire fleets that had been concealed behind moons and planets for years. The other species had always called humans paranoid. They said humans worried. Too much, planned too much, prepared for threats that might never come. What they didn't understand was that humans had learned from their own history. They knew what happened to civilizations that weren't ready when stronger enemies came calling. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "we're getting reports from outside human space too. Something big is happening on Veltari Prime." Tae-ho turned to look at the new data streaming across his screens. On planets throughout the galaxy, species that had been under alien control for centuries were rising up. The Zelthani, who had been treated like slaves by the Krex Empire for over 200 years, had somehow gotten their hands on advanced weapons and were attacking their oppressors' military bases. The Korvani, peaceful traders who had been forced to give most of their profits to the Galactic Council, had seized control of their own trade routes. How are they coordinating all this? Tae-ho wondered out loud. His intelligence officer, Lieutenant Lee Min-ho, pulled up another screen. "Sir, it looks like they've been talking to each other through hidden communication networks that use human technology and human encryption methods. They've been planning this for months, maybe years." It was starting to make sense. For decades, human diplomats, traders, and explorers had been traveling throughout the galaxy, making friends with species that other civilizations ignored or exploited. They had shared stories about Earth's history, about how humans had fought for their freedom against kings and emperors. They had talked about democracy, about the idea that every intelligent being deserved to choose their own leaders and live their own lives. The Galactic Council had called this ideological contamination, but what it really was hope. Hope for a better future, hope for freedom, hope that even the smallest and weakest species could stand up to bullies if they worked together. Now, as the Council's fleets moved to destroy humanity, all of those oppressed species were standing up at the same time. They had been waiting for this moment, when humanity would finally show its true strength to reveal their own. Admiral, his tactical officer, announced, "The alien fleets are within weapons range of Earth." Tejo looked at the screen showing his home planet, that beautiful blue marble that had given birth to the human race. Then he looked at the readings from across human space, showing thousands of ships and millions of people ready to fight for their survival. "All ships," he said into his communicator, "this is Admiral Kim. Today we show the galaxy what humans are really made of." The silence in space was broken by the first exchange of weapons fire near the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. Admiral Kim Tejo watched from his command ship as bright streaks of energy lit up the darkness, painting deadly rainbows across the void. The alien fleet had arranged itself in perfect geometric formations, just like their military textbooks probably taught them. Neat rows of massive warships, each one bristling with enough firepower to level a city. The Council commanders had clearly expected this to be over quickly. Their ships were 3 times larger than anything humans had built, with weapons that could punch through a mountain. They probably thought they would just line up, fire a few volleys, and watch the primitive human fleet scatter like frightened animals. They were wrong. Captain Park Soo-jin, commanding the human destroyer Soul's Pride, was the first to break formation. Instead of meeting the alien line head-on like they expected, she ordered her ship to dive under the enemy formation, using the gravity of a nearby asteroid to slingshot her vessel at impossible angles. Her weapons officer, Ensign Kim Hye-jin, waited until they were directly beneath the alien flagship before firing a concentrated burst at their engine section. The massive alien ship shuddered and began to list to one side, its perfect formation disrupted. Suddenly, dozens of other human ships were doing the same thing, weaving between the asteroids like dancers, using the floating rocks as shields and launching platforms. The aliens tried to adjust their formation, but their ships were too big, too slow, designed for overwhelming firepower rather than quick maneuvering. "They fight like machines," muttered Lieutenant Commander Choi Min-woo from his position at the tactical station. All programming, no creativity, and he was right. The alien ships moved in predictable patterns, following battle plans that had probably worked against other species for centuries. But humans had learned warfare in a different school. They had fought each other for thousands of years on Earth, developing tactics that were chaotic, unpredictable, and absolutely deadly when used correctly. The real shock came when Captain Lee Jung-soo of the heavy cruiser Busan Thunder did something that made every alien commander in the fleet freeze in disbelief. His ship locked onto a damaged council vessel and extended docking clamps. "Prepare boarding parties," Lee announced over the communication channel. The alien fleet commanders couldn't believe what they were seeing. Boarding enemy ships in the middle of a space battle was considered suicide by every civilized species in the galaxy. Ships were too well defended, the risks too great, the chances of success too small. It simply wasn't done. But humans had been boarding enemy ships since they first learned to sail across Earth's oceans. Marine Sergeant Oh Da-min led her squad of 20 soldiers through the docking tube and into the alien vessel. The ship's interior was designed for the tall, thin Veltari species, so the human Marines had to crouch as they moved through the corridors, but that actually worked in their favor. They were smaller targets, harder to hit, and more mobile in the cramped spaces. The Veltari crew had never faced boarding action before. They panicked, abandoning their posts and running for the escape pods. Within 30 minutes, Oh Da-min's Marines had taken control of the entire ship, capturing its weapons systems and turning them against the rest of the alien fleet. Other human ships saw this success and began their own boarding actions. Soon, A dozen alien vessels had been captured from the inside, their crews either surrendering or fleeing. The neat formation of the Council fleet began to fall apart, as ships had to worry about attacks from their own captured vessels. But the moment that truly turned the tide came when Chief Engineer Lee Da-hai, working frantically in the engine room of Admiral Kim's flagship, activated a device that had been under development for 3 years. The quantum disruptor was humanity's most closely guarded secret, a weapon that could shut down the energy systems of an entire fleet without actually destroying the ships. "Quantum field generator online," Da-hai announced, her hands flying over the control panels. "Targeting enemy power cores." The effect was immediate and devastating. One by one, the massive alien warships simply went dark. Their weapons stopped firing, their engines shut down, their shields collapsed. They hung in space like giant metal, coffins completely helpless but still intact. Admiral Kim had specifically ordered that the disruptors be calibrated to disable rather than destroy. Even in the heat of battle, even facing an enemy that had come to wipe out his entire species, he refused to become a mass killer. The alien crews would survive, though their ships were now useless. News of the victory spread faster than light itself through the galaxy's communication networks. On planets throughout known space, oppressed species who had been watching the battle through hidden transmissions began to cheer. If the mighty Galactic Council fleet could be defeated by the supposedly primitive humans, then perhaps other tyrants could be defeated too. On the mining world of Kepler 442b, the enslaved Corvani workers seized control of their processing facilities. On the agricultural planet of Ross 128b, the peaceful Zelthani farmers picked up weapons and marched on the Krex military compounds that had been controlling their lives for generations. The human victory at the asteroid belt had done more than save Earth. It had lit a fire of hope throughout the galaxy that would burn brighter with each passing day. 3 weeks after the battle at the asteroid belt, Admiral Kim Tae-ho stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching. Reports flood in from across the galaxy. What had started as humanity's desperate fight for survival had become something much bigger, something that was reshaping the entire balance of power in known space. "Sir, we're getting another transmission from the Antares sector," announced Communications Officer Lieutenant Park Bo-young. "The Zelthani have successfully taken control of their agricultural worlds. They're requesting technical support to establish their own government." Tae-ho nodded, but his attention was focused on the larger tactical display, showing the collapse of galactic civilization as they knew it. Red indicators marked worlds in rebellion, yellow showed contested systems, and green represented the growing number of planets that had declared independence from their former overlords. The map looked like a disease spreading through the galaxy, but Tae-ho knew it was actually something much healthier: freedom. The Veltari Empire, which had controlled over 40 star systems for nearly 800 years, was falling apart faster than anyone could have imagined. Their silver-skinned leaders had built their power on the backs of a dozen different slave species, forcing them to mine precious metals, grow food, and manufacture goods that made the Veltari wealthy and comfortable. But those same slave species had been quietly talking to human traders and diplomats for years, learning about concepts like democracy and individual rights. When news of humanity's victory reached the Veltari worlds, the enslaved populations didn't just rebel, they coordinated their rebellion. Captain Yun Haijin, leading a small human support fleet, arrived at Veltari Prime to find the planet's surface lit up with explosions as the former slaves fought their way to freedom using weapons and tactics that human advisors had secretly taught them over the years. "The Veltari leadership is requesting immediate assistance," Yun reported to Admiral Kim. "They're offering to surrender their entire fleet if we'll help them maintain order." "Tell them we'll accept their surrender," Kim replied, "but they'll have to negotiate with their former slaves about maintaining order. That's not our job anymore." The warrior Krex were facing an even worse situation. For centuries, they had built their reputation as the galaxy's greatest military force, conquering weaker species and forcing them to serve in Krex armies. They had been so confident in their strength that they had never bothered to treat their subject peoples with any kindness or respect. Now those same subject peoples were turning that Krex military training against their former masters. Entire Krex colonies were being overrun by their own former soldiers, beings they had conscripted from conquered worlds and trained to fight. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The Krex had created their own destroyers. "Admiral," called out intelligence, Officer Major Song Ji-hoon, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the Galactic Council homeworld. They want to negotiate." Kim almost laughed. 6 months ago, these same council members had voted to expel humanity from galactic civilization. They had sent fleets to destroy Earth and everyone on it. Now they wanted to talk. "Put them through," he said. The main screen filled with the image of the council chamber, but it looked very different from the last time Ambassador Park Ji-won had stood there. Half the seats were empty. Representatives had fled back to their homeworlds to deal with rebellions. The remaining council members looked terrified, their various alien features all showing the same expression of fear and desperation. Chief, Councillor Vextar, the four-armed creature who had pronounced humanity's expulsion, stepped forward. His bark-like skin looked pale and cracked. "Admiral Kim, we wish to discuss terms for ending this conflict." "There are no terms to discuss," Kim replied calmly. "You made your choices when you decided to destroy my species. Now you get to live with the consequences." "But surely reasonable beings can find a peaceful solution," Vextar pleaded. "We could restore humanity's council membership, provide compensation for damages." "You still don't understand," Kim interrupted. "This isn't about us getting back into your little club. This is about justice for every species you've been oppressing for the past 1,000 years. 2 days later, Admiral Kim's fleet arrived at the Council homeworld. The planet hung before them like a blue-green jewel, its surface covered with magnificent cities that had been built with the wealth extracted from 100 conquered worlds. The planetary defense systems had been shut down. There was no point in fighting anymore. But instead of unleashing the orbital bombardment that everyone expected, Kim did something that shocked the galaxy. He broadcast a message to every communication network on the planet. "People of the Council worlds," his voice reached every home and building on the surface, "humanity has not come here for revenge. We have come for justice. Your leaders will stand trial for their crimes, but you, the ordinary citizens who had no say in their decisions, have nothing to fear from us." The trials that followed were broadcast across the galaxy. One by one, council members faced charges, not just for their attack on humanity, but for centuries of systematic oppression. The evidence that Ambassador Park Ji-won had risked her life to obtain painted a clear picture of how the Council had deliberately kept weaker species under control, preventing them from developing their own technology and independence. The most damning evidence came from the Council's own records, showing how they had manipulated smaller civilizations, created artificial conflicts to weaken potential rivals, and used economic pressure to force compliance with their will. Former Chief Counselor Vextar, facing testimony from dozens of liberated species, finally broke down and confessed. "We told ourselves we were maintaining galactic peace," he said, his forearms hanging limply at his sides. "But the truth is we were just maintaining our own power." The trials would continue for months, but the message was already clear to every watching civilization. The age of the Galactic Council's domination was over. The war was over, but the real work was just beginning. Admiral Kim Tae-ho stood in what had once been the Galactic Council's main assembly hall, watching as construction crews from a dozen different species worked together to remove the old symbols of power and replace them with something entirely new. The towering throne where the Chief Counselor had once sat was being dismantled piece by piece, its precious metals recycled into communication equipment that would connect the far corners of the galaxy. It would have been so easy for humanity to simply take over where the Council had left off. After all, human fleets now controlled the most important star systems. Human technology had proven superior in battle, and human ideas had inspired the greatest political revolution in galactic history. Many species were actually expecting humanity to become the new rulers, to establish a human empire that would span the stars. But that wasn't what humans wanted, and more importantly, It wasn't what the newly freed species needed. "Admiral," called out Dr. Shin Era, the political scientist who had been working with teams from 40 different worlds to design a new form of government. "We've received the final proposals from the Outer Rim territories. I think you're going to be pleased with what they've come up with." Kim walked over to where Era was standing, next to a massive holographic display showing the entire galaxy. Each star system was color-coded, based on the type of government its inhabitants wanted to establish. Some preferred direct democracy, others wanted representative systems, and a few still wanted traditional monarchies. But the key difference was that now each world got to choose for itself. "The Corvani delegation has proposed something particularly interesting," Era continued, pointing to a cluster of trading worlds near the galactic core. "They want to establish an economic cooperative where every member world has equal voting rights regardless of their population or military strength. They're calling it the Small Worlds Protection Pact." This was exactly the kind of innovation that Kim had hoped to see. Instead of one massive government controlling everything, the galaxy was developing into a network of smaller alliances and federations, each one designed to meet the specific needs of its member species. The centerpiece of this new system was the Free Worlds Alliance, but it wasn't designed to be another empire. Instead, it was more like a neutral meeting ground where different governments could work together on issues that affected everyone. Things like interstellar trade, scientific research, and preventing any one species from becoming too powerful. Ambassador. Park Ji-won had spent the last 6 months traveling to hundreds of worlds, working with local leaders to draft a constitution for the alliance. The document was unlike anything that had ever existed in galactic politics. Instead of giving power to the strongest or richest species, it was designed specifically to protect the weakest ones. "Every intelligent species has the right to govern itself," read Article 1 of the new Constitution. "No species may impose its will upon another through force, economic pressure, or technological superiority." The Constitution also established something called the protection principle. Any species that felt threatened by a more powerful neighbor could appeal to the alliance for help. Unlike the old council, which had often ignored such requests or used them as excuses to extend their own power, the alliance was required to respond within 30 standard days. But perhaps the most revolutionary part of the new system was how it dealt with former council members. Many people expected mass executions or permanent exile for the beings who had oppressed the galaxy for so long. Instead, the alliance offered something called rehabilitation through service. Former Chief Counselor Vex Tar, the four-armed creature, who had once ruled over dozens of worlds, now spent his days working in refugee camps, helping species that had been displaced by the war. His massive size and multiple arms made him surprisingly good at heavy construction work. And slowly, very slowly, he was beginning to understand what his policies had done to ordinary people. "I used to think governing meant making decisions for others," Vex Tar admitted during one of his regular interviews with Alliance investigators. "Now I'm learning that real leadership means helping others make their own decisions." Not all former council members adapted as well as Vex Tar, but many did. Some became teachers, sharing their knowledge of galactic history and technology with species that had been kept ignorant. Others worked as mediators, using their diplomatic experience to help resolve conflicts between newly independent worlds. The transformation wasn't just political, it was personal. Captain Yoon Hai-jin, who had led the liberation of several Veltari worlds, found herself working alongside former Veltari nobles to establish new schools and hospitals. Lieutenant Commander Choi Min-woo, who had fought in the asteroid belt battle, was now training former Krex warriors to become peacekeepers instead of conquerors. Admiral Kim himself made perhaps the biggest change of all. When the Alliance delegates unanimously voted to make him their first Secretary General, he accepted on one condition. The position would be limited to a single 5-year term, and no species could hold the office more than once every 50 years. "Power corrupts," he explained to the assembled delegates. "If we want to avoid repeating the Council's mistakes, we have to make sure no one, not even humans, gets too comfortable in charge." The celebration that marked the official founding of the Free Worlds Alliance took place on Earth, in the same city where the United Nations had been established centuries earlier. Representatives from over 300 species gathered in a massive amphitheater, built specifically for the occasion, with translation systems that could handle the communication needs of beings who spoke through everything from sound waves to chemical signals. As Kim looked out at the crowd, he saw species that had been enemies for generations, sitting side by side, sharing food and stories. Former slaves worked alongside their former masters, not because they had to, but because they had chosen to build something better together. The ceremony's most moving moment came when a small Zelthani child, representing one of the species that had been oppressed the longest, handed Kim a crystal sculpture that had been carved by artists from every member world of the Alliance. "This is for all the humans who fought for our freedom," the child said, in perfectly clear Standard Galactic, a language she had been forbidden to learn just a year earlier. Kim accepted the crystal, but then he did something that surprised everyone. He handed it back to the child. "This belongs to all of us," he said, "because freedom isn't something you give to someone else, it's something you build together." The crowd erupted in cheers that echoed across the galaxy, carried by communication, networks to billions of beings who were experiencing true freedom for the first time in their lives. And in that moment, everyone understood that humanity's greatest victory wasn't defeating the Council's fleets. It was proving that a better future was possible for everyone,